A while later, the situation calmed down a bit and Lu Sheng and Lingsu went back into the mansion and began to talk to each other. Lingsu also calmed down a bit and with a serene expression asked Lu Sheng what he had just said. In response, Lu Sheng extended his hands to the sides and with a cheerful smile replied that he hadn't said anything, explaining that in reality he didn't usually behave like that. Lingsu started to observe him and remained silent, thinking that Lu Sheng was someone very interesting. Lu Sheng began pointing at himself with his thumb, and his face transformed into Jotaro's. He had always been a very reasonable, humble, and discreet person, but today he had made an exception for her. Seeing his expression, Lingsu's gaze filled with confusion. The truth was that she didn't believe him one bit. She turned her back on him and began to walk away. Lu Sheng turned his head back, started observing the party with a curious look. He had used his body as bait to attract and kill members of the Black Magic Society, then had projected his martial will to kill Lion Su, afterward had traveled thousands of kilometers to deliberately attack the Chen family territory. In conclusion, he had made his plan succeed. But then, his expression became serious and his gaze restless since he always had a strange feeling of unease. But it was strange because the immortal cells in his forehead were calm and without any problem. However, he simply felt that something was not right. Our boy put his hand under his chin, and with a calm gaze came to the conclusion that he was overthinking it and began to smile. He turned to Lion Su, put his hand near his mouth, and asked her if she wanted to take this moment to talk about the next recipe. Hearing this, the attention of Lingsu, who was leaving, returned to Lu Sheng. Without losing a second, she turned around, approached Lu Sheng, and with an anxious expression replied yes. Seeing her behavior, Lu Sheng couldn't help but feel somewhat confused, realizing that she got very excited when it came to making medicines. After a few hours, once the party came to an end, the lights in the guest hall of the Chen family mansion were turned on. In the room were Chen, General Du, and Jiang He. Both sat on the sofas, and while Du and Jiang He were enjoying a cup of tea, Chen extended his hand with a grateful smile and thanked them both from the bottom of his heart for what they had done tonight. Otherwise, the Chen family would be completely finished. Jiang He moved the teacup away from his mouth after taking a sip and, with a serious expression, mentioned that they had only made a small effort, but that fortune and misfortune were intertwined, advising Chen to take this opportunity to properly reorganize his household since, after all, Lingsu was still part of his family. Du turned to Chen, and with a calm look, he asked him to forgive him for not stepping forward to defend him, as honestly he had been surprised to encounter Commander Lu Sheng. Only after observing carefully had he dared to confirm. General Du's eyes filled with seriousness, revealing that before the military exercises of the entire army, there were some things that were still at a confidential stage. He could only tell them that Commander Lu Sheng's strength far exceeded their imagination, and the army had great expectations for him in the future, revealing that he was the only one who could match up to the person backing Elder Jiang Chen. Upon hearing this revelation, Chen and Jiang He were shocked and their eyes filled with surprise. They did not expect Lu Sheng to be so strong. With a look full of fear, Chen began to imagine the intimidating Elder Tang Zhonghu, better known as the Martial Saint. He couldn't help but start feeling terror at the thought that this meant Lu Sheng had a great possibility in the future of reaching level 9 and becoming a martial saint. Even though he had overestimated his identity, he did not expect his true foundation to be hundreds of times more solid and exaggerated than he had imagined. General Du stood up, and seeing that there was nothing else to discuss, decided to leave first. Chen also stood up, and while keeping one hand behind his back, extended the other toward him and decided to accompany him to the exit. Jiang He, who was sitting nearby, remained silent. Chen placed his hand on General Du's shoulder, and both began moving toward the exit. Jiang He's expression filled with seriousness and fear, causing a drop of sweat to appear on his cheek. According to him, Lu Sheng was an extremely surprising person. He decided it would be best to immediately inform the Martial Saint. But then he realized that the Martial Saint should already know it. It was already night, and the sky was clear and full of beautiful, bright stars. Lingsu accompanied Lu Sheng to the entrance of the hotel. He turned his back to her and started waving goodbye with his hand. With a smile, she also began waving goodbye to him, and before leaving, Lu Sheng handed her the formula for the 4 levels of Golden Dragon Saliva. Lu Sheng entered the hotel and went to the balcony of his room, which had a beautiful view of the entire city. He placed his hand on top of the railing and couldn't help but start smiling. He had given her the new formula because for Ling Sheng Pharmaceutical to reach its current level of development, it needed a truly high-end product to establish its position in the market. He began to observe the landscape, and his eyes filled with confidence as he remembered that Lingsu had chosen to be by his side without hesitation despite becoming the target of all criticism, which demonstrated the true loyalty she had toward him. Lu Sheng closed his eyes and, with an embarrassed expression, recalled that the last time someone had done something like that was during the new students' meeting. Lindsay had run out to confront those who questioned Lu Sheng and had proudly shouted about their national essence. Lindsay had flipped everyone off and cursed their families. For Lu Sheng, this had been something surprising. Lu Sheng got tired of the city views and entered his room. And while he was walking, he decided to meet up with his old friends. He took out a bottle that he had in his pocket and began to observe it with a curious look, remembering that he had not yet studied it carefully. It was said to be a super elixir capable of poisoning even a level 9 martial saint. The bottle began to emit an intense energy. This poison was called the Saint's Lament. Lu Sheng had tried to search for information about it in the future, and the only thing he had found was that it was said this thing was extremely extraordinary. Even in 10,000 years of future martial arts, it could still cause very powerful damage to the strongest martial arts warriors. There were even incidents where level 10 warriors were poisoned and killed by it, causing great commotion. Lu Sheng took the bottle, brought it closer, began to observe it and couldn't help but start smiling. His mind filled with curiosity, so he decided it was time to test the effects of the poison. The bottle began to emit an intense demonic energy, capable of making anyone nearby run away. But for Lu Sheng, it was different, his gaze filled with confidence. Not even a level 9 martial saint could resist this poison, and if he managed to withstand it, it would mean that he was stronger than a level 9 martial saint. Although Lu Sheng didn't want to risk his life, he was very curious about how exactly this poison could kill martial saints. The physique of a great level 7 master was already enough to be immune to more than 90% of the world's poisons. They could drink poison as if it were water. Lu Sheng began to imagine the body of a level 7 Grand Master, who had powerful green antibodies with an immunity 100 times superior to that of an ordinary person, along with cellular activity and metabolic speed. Common poisons could be metabolized before taking effect, and even if they did, the body would quickly repair itself. In the system, it was mentioned that this poison had been extracted from toxins within exotic beasts of level 9 or higher, involving something much deeper than the genetic level. Once the poison entered the body, it began to destroy all cells. With great care, Lu Sheng removed the stopper from the bottle. It was said that the poison would cause permanent damage, but for him, this was not important since the cells in his body would sooner or later be replaced by immortal cells. Lu Sheng activated his power, causing a purple aura to appear around his body. He began staring intently at the bottle and using his power started extracting the poison from within. He was using his mental strength to precisely extract 1/10,000th of the poison just to feel its effect a little. Lu Sheng precisely extracted a bit of poison and then inserted it into a glass of water. With great care, using his power, he began diluting it slightly. After successfully diluting the poison in the water, Lu Sheng picked up the glass, which began to emit a demonic aura. He started using his spiritual strength to detect any trace of the poison but found nothing, and when using the perception of warriors, he also found no fluctuations. It was no longer surprising to him that even a martial saint could fall into the trap and drink the poison without realizing it. Without hesitating for a second, Lu Sheng began drinking the water. Several seconds later, he emptied the entire glass, opened his mouth, and ate the glass to leave no traces since with his constitution he could chew even raw steel without problems. Several minutes later, Lu Sheng sat on the bed in silence, waiting to see the effects of the poison. Not long after, veins appeared on our boy's face, and his eyes filled with alertness, realizing that the poison had already begun to take effect. Lu Sheng calmed down, began to meditate and feel a strange sensation in his abdomen. Then, he started to feel intense pain. The water with the poison reached Lu Sheng's stomach and stuck to its walls. The poison began to take shape, and its gaze fixed on the cells that were in the stomach. The poison took the form of a demon. With a smile, it began to extend its hand to catch one of the cells. But then, the immortal cells of Lu Sheng appeared upon detecting a threat and went on alert. Our boy placed his hand over his chest and couldn't help but smile. He was happy to understand what was happening. The cells inside his body were fighting against the invader. The power of the poison wanted to devour his body to transform it into a beast. The poison tried to devour the cells, but the immortal cells began to fight against it, not giving it any chance to defend itself. The poison was trying to merge with Lu Sheng's DNA, but his cells were desperately fighting to prevent the transformation from happening. With a serious look, Lu Sheng remembered that the genes of beasts, as advanced beings, were extremely aggressive. Too deep a contact with them could lead the body to be influenced or even assimilated. It was similar to those dark paths he had encountered in the depths of the cave back then. Not only had the soldiers' spiritual strength been distorted, but their bodies had also been contaminated and taken on beastly forms. Lu Sheng began imagining one of the men eating a beast. He placed his hand over his abdomen, and his eyes filled with surprise. Despite having ingested some poison, it was comparable to an ordinary person eating a level 7 exotic beast, the only difference being that his body was too strong. Now he wasn't afraid. Our boy focused a little, and his body began to expel the poison from his system. Seeing that the poison had been expelled, he was somewhat surprised and realized that the poison affected at a genetic level. In the system, it was stated that the toxicity surpassed the genetic level, and Lu Sheng did not know exactly what this meant, questioning whether the toxicity would only manifest more clearly after the cells were affected. Lu Sheng extended his hand and, using his sharp nail, made a cut on the palm of his hand. Then he began to observe the wound and with a smile decided to test the effect of the poison on his palm. Using his power, he started controlling the bottle of poison and very carefully dropped one drop onto the wound he had just made on his palm. Upon seeing what was happening, Lu Sheng's eyes filled with alertness and he was surprised. He couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. The poison began to take effect and entered his palm, causing veins to appear on his hand. He started observing it and couldn't help but become alert, thinking this wasn't good. The poison began to enter his body, but then his cells appeared and started fighting with all their strength to resist the invasion of the drop of poison. The wound began to emit a demonic aura. Upon seeing this, Lu Sheng realized that if this continued, the poison would be forced to come out. Our boy activated his mental strength, and his gaze filled with determination. The poison couldn't do it on its own, so Lu Sheng decided to help it win this battle. Veins appeared on Lu Sheng's face. He grabbed his wrist and with a piercing look gave the order for the poison to enter obediently, causing his palm to start glowing. The poison began to enter his palm, and his hand started to transform into that of a demon, making claws appear. A while later, the poison successfully entered his body. Lu Sheng began to observe his hand, and his gaze filled with disappointment since he felt nothing. But just then, a demonic eye appeared in the middle of his palm, right where he had made the wound for the poison to enter. Seeing this, Lu Sheng's eyes filled with surprise and confusion. He began to sweat and went on alert, wondering what was happening. This is the end of the video.